The 10th chapter. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. This is the word of the Lord, and you may be seated. Well, school was out. School was out for little Johnny and his sister, Katie, which meant that they were headed as they were each year to Grandma Harriet's house for a week. The first week of summer vacation, every year, little Johnny and his sister Katie headed to Grandma's house for a week up there in that little small town up in northern Minnesota. It was a small town where there was that cafe, and the cafe was the place where you went to get the news. And there were a couple of gas stations, a Legion, a grocery store. It was that quintessential northern Minnesota town. There were also several churches in this small town. St. Joseph's is the Catholic church, but though Grandma Harriet had lived there all 86 years of her life, well, she never really got to know too many of those Catholics there. And there's a small Baptist church that they just built their own building. It's a pretty basic building. It's just a metal building. Grandma Harriet and her girlfriends think it doesn't look all that much like a church. A little more like a pole barn, they said. And thinking of those Baptists, on Sunday morning, Harriet has to drive by First Baptist Church on her way out to Little Norway Lutheran Church. And as she does each Sunday morning, she always sighs, a heavy sigh, and seems a little disgusted because as she drives by First Baptist, you can always hear the drums and the guitars bellowing out on Sunday morning out the doors. What do they think they're running over there? She'd say to the girls at the cafe. Sounds more like a bar on Saturday night than a church. Of course, there were two Lutheran churches in town. The Swedes built the church in town, Gustavus Adolphus Lutheran, and the Norwegians built the church out in the country. Of course, Harriet and the girls, they attended Little Norway out in the country. You know, their parents were founding members of that church. Well, as I said, it was the first week of the summer. And every year, Harriet invited the grandkids to come and visit. Little Johnny and Sister Katie loved visiting Grandma Harriet. Grandma Harriet would bake cookies for them. She'd take them out to the old farm. Harriet would, she'd take them down to the mercantile uptown where they could sift through all the old dusty shelves and find treasures that Grandma was sure to buy them. They'd stop at the cafe and meet up with Harriet's friends. And while the ladies talked, Johnny and Sister Katie would sip on malts there at the cafe. Johnny loved being with Grandma. He even liked going to her little old church out in the country. It was this cute little kind of gingerbread-looking church. And when you walked down the aisle of this little old church, those hard wooden floors, those old wooden floors, they would creak. It felt like you were walking back in time. Johnny he especially loved when Grandma would tell stories about his mother. Especially, he loved the story about his mother when she was an acolyte. She was acolyting one Sunday morning with the neighbor boy. His name was Clint Knutson, who was so nervous that one Sunday morning that while lighting the candles before the service, he knocked over one of the burning altar candles, and it lit the parament cloths on the altar on fire. Luckily, the church council president was sitting in the front row. He grabbed the baptismal font bowl and doused the fire with the baptism water. What's interesting is that rather than replace the parament cloths, the church had them dry cleaned because they were made by old Betty Bjornson, and she was a founding member of Little Norway Lutheran Church. And so there to this day sit those burnt, half-burnt parament cloths. They're clean, but still burnt. Johnny and Katie enjoyed Grandma's church. Everyone was so friendly. And Grandma seemed to know everyone by name and have something to talk about with each one of them. But what Johnny always found interesting is how when the organist at Grandma's church started playing her prelude before the service started, something always clicked inside of Grandma. It was really weird. You could see it on her face. All of a sudden, when the organist stepped up to the bench and started playing, any smile on Grandma's face was instantly gone. When Johnny was little, he remembers asking his mother, "What's wrong with Grandma? Is she mad at the organist or something?" To be honest, Grandma didn't have much patience for monkey business during church. If Johnny or Katie made a peep during worship, all Grandma needed to do was to give that look, that mother look, and they knew Grandma meant business. Grandma would never say it out loud, but they knew in church Grandma felt kids were to be seen and not heard. When a baby would cry or by chance a child would throw a fit during worship, Johnny always remembers Grandma sighing as if more than a little put out by the distraction. Johnny never really understood this because Grandma's pastor, Pastor Nelson, was never all that interesting in the first place. He was kind of a monotone guy, and he just rambled on and on. Grandma's church, Johnny knows, is filled with a lot of no's. No talking, no smiling, no fidgeting, no laughing, no silly business, and certainly no clapping. One summer at Little Norway, a while back, the head usher thought it would be a great idea to invite some high school students to usher for the summer, a great way to get the kids involved. They showed up that Sunday, these high school boys, and all was fine until it came to the part in the service when the young men were to walk the offering plates up to the pastor. Well, it seems the boys missed their cue to head up the aisle with the offering plates because they were texting their friend, Pete Olson, who was sitting in the front row with his family. It seems there was a fly that kept landing on the forehead of Pastor Nelson. And every time the pastor would shoo it away with his hand, it would keep coming back, landing right there on his forehead. And each time he would reach his hand over to swat it away, he would catch the edge of his comb over with his hand. And for a moment, that long comb-over hair would stand straight up. It was like this shark fin or a mohawk just standing up. Well, the ushers finally made it up the aisle with the offering plates after Betty Paulson, the church organist, increased the volume of the offering hymn significantly enough to get their attention. That's when Harriet noticed. She noticed the boys, these high school ushers. They were wearing jeans, T-shirts, and tennis shoes. Johnny had never heard Grandma Harriet sigh quite as loud as she did that day in church. When the service was over, she immediately asked little Johnny and Katie to please go out to the car. Johnny is pretty sure that Grandma Harriet gave the head usher an earful. He also imagined Harriet had a conversation with Pastor Nelson and reminded him that if our youth took confirmation more seriously and consequently the pastor took it more seriously, we wouldn't have to deal with these troubled youth. Harriet made it well known that she believed that most of the problems with today's youth had something to do with the fact that confirmation students no longer were required to memorize Luther's small catechism. Interestingly, on subsequent summer trips to Grandma's, Johnny never remembers seeing those high school kids in church ever again. What's even more funny is that over the years, Johnny sees fewer and fewer kids at Grandma's church anymore. In fact, looking around, most of the people at Grandma's church have this slightly gray, white, or blue hue to their hair. He often wondered why that was. Well, it was one of those hot days, summer days. In the summer, it was always hot at Little Norway Lutheran Church in the summer. After church, on the way home, on the way to the cafe for lunch, Johnny asked Grandma why they don't get air conditioning at the church. And did Johnny get an earful from Grandma? It seems a couple of years ago, the Johnsons, another family of farmers who attend Little Norway, had an exceptionally good crop that year and told the pastor that they would like to pay to have air conditioning put in the church. Well, as the heating and air conditioning installment men pulled their truck up to the church one Monday morning to install the air conditioning unit, Bill Anderson, who lives just south of the church, quickly got on the phone with Harriet, and they put that to a halt. At the next church council meeting, the church board heard Harriet rant about how Jesus and his disciples never had air conditioning, and they worked day and night in the desert, and how such creature comforts are a slippery slope to a lazy faith. Jesus wasn't just wasting words when he said, "We all have our cross to bear." Johnny heard that the Johnsons, too, left the church, and much to the pastor's disgust, he spends each Sunday sweating under the weight of the heavy alb he is forced to wear during worship. And that's a whole nother story. One Sunday, a couple of years back, the church had a special Sunday workday. The idea was that after worship on Sunday, the entire congregation would have a potluck lunch and then spend the afternoon doing spring cleaning around the church. Well, the pastor decided to preach a sermon about rolling up your sleeves and how sometimes being a Christian means getting your hands dirty. So for a visual, he decided not to wear his gown and stole. Instead, he wore a pair of overalls and a flannel shirt. Well, as you can imagine, that didn't go over all that well with Harriet and the girls, so much so that they put forth a proposal to the church council to amend the constitution of the church to read that all pastors, when leading worship at Little Norway Lutheran Church, are required to wear the traditional 100% woolen robes like the Norwegian immigrant pastors wore who founded the church way back in the 1890s. If it was good enough for our forefathers, it is good enough for us, she said. Well, Johnny always got this feeling that Grandma Harriet really loved. She really loved her church. She was always there, always volunteering, always helping with meals. She never missed a Sunday, and the people at Grandma's church they were really a friendly bunch, and they always remembered Johnny and Katie by name. But every year when Johnny spent that week with Grandma Harriet, he always wondered if church was ever any fun for Grandma Harriet. It just always seemed that for Grandma, church and faith were really serious business. It was like Harriet thought church wasn't church unless there was a little suffering and endurance involved. For example, Grandma was never really big on Christmas or Easter. Easter and Christmas were the heathen holidays to Grandma. Too much fluff and joy catering to those part-time Christians, she'd say. For Grandma Harriet, faith was a serious matter. As you can imagine, she loved Lent and Holy Week. If there wasn't some grief or misery or pain, then the church wasn't being a real church, and consequently, we weren't being real Christians. Johnny always wondered each and every year what this was all about. Anyone know a Harriet? Anyone have a Harriet voice that lingers in the back of your head? Huh? Folks, in our reading today, Jesus is responding, if you will, to the Harriets of the ancient world. The Harriet Pharisees and scribes and those temple muckety-mucks, those Harriets who believed God wanted nothing else but higher standards from God's people, that God was constantly disappointed in God's people, that the Bible was a book of rules and it was clear. And you either choose to follow those rules or you don't. You're either in or you're out. And these Harriets of the ancient world, these Pharisees, these scribes, they took it upon themselves to police the faithful, reminding the faithful that they weren't quite good enough as they were. They weren't whole enough. They didn't stack up, that unless you are suffering and enduring, you're not in the club. But Jesus, as we read today, Jesus arrives on the scene, and rather than agree and confirm that laundry list of all the expectations those Pharisees have, Jesus simply says these words, I am the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. I came that you might have life and that you might have it abundantly. I didn't come to steal your life. I didn't come to steal your sense of worth, to tear you down. I didn't come that you might be torn down, but that you might have life and have it abundantly. Yes, there are some who come to rob you of your life, to beat you down, to make you suffer, but that's not me. I come that you might have life and have it abundantly, that you might have purpose and joy and love and abundant life. I think many of us have that nagging Harriet voice in the back of our head. I know some of you do because you've told me about it, that this God of ours has standards, that I've got to try harder, to do more, to be a better Christian. Folks, when I read these stories of Jesus, that's not what I hear at all. Rather, again and again, what I hear loud and clear is the voice of this shepherd. The easy, simple voice of this shepherd who says to you and to me, I know you. I know you. I want you. I've come that you might have life, that you might have it abundantly. That whatever the Harriets of this world are telling you again and again, know this, you are loved. You are whole. Folks, you are a precious gift of God. You are worth so much to this good and great God of ours, just as you are. Thanks be to God. Amen.